Mike. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar titled Future Focus, a look beyond with Peter Mulford and Peter Coffey. I'm Mike Anastasides. I'm a solutions director with Hike2. Hike2 provides advisory services solutions for companies across industries, companies such as public sector institutions, professional services companies, high-tech companies, law firms, absolutely. We're a consulting firm, really with a focus in several different areas, cloud solutions, so big Salesforce practice, Snowflake as well, data analytics. We have an innovation group, as well as a human-centered design group and an advisory services group as well. We help companies, we help organizations, we help firms that are looking to digitally transform, and you're going to hear about digital transformation today, that's for sure. But we help these companies really make the most of their current and future technical investments. We're doing this, of course, to help them solve their biggest business challenges. I'm excited to be joined by two people named Peter. Peter Mulford, I'll intro Peter first, Peter Mulford first. Peter's the Chief Innovation Officer at BTS. He leads the innovation and digital transformation practice at BTS, a management consultancy focused on strategy, execution. He helps leaders, he helps teams, he helps firms from and different groups from Fortune 500 companies from around the world really succeed when it comes to digital transformation. And here is a fun fact that Peter laid upon us just this week. Peter recently facilitated a 2-day offsite at the Vatican with Pope Francis and a number of media executives, which I think is an amazing fun fact. We could probably do 45 minutes on that, but and maybe we'll save some time at the end for that. But that's, I think, really sort of good for people to know, and again, sort of an amazing fact. And Peter's LinkedIn says he's based in New York, but I think he spends lots of time in different places. Rome probably maybe being one of those places. Peter, where are you coming from today, Peter Mulford?
Today I'm back in New York, although I just got back from Chicago. So and I'm on my way to Bangkok, Thailand. So if you want to invest in United Airlines stock, now might not be a bad time to do that.
All right. Well, thank you. And Peter Coffey. So I was at Salesforce, everyone, for 10 years prior to Hike2, and I will tell you that Peter Coffey is a person that really commands the utmost respect within Salesforce, and for good reason. Peter is the VP of Strategic Research at Salesforce. He has an engineering degree from MIT, an MBA from Pepperdine. He's been a faculty member at UCLA, at Pepperdine. He's lectured at Stanford, Caltech, Harvard Business School, lots of other different places, I'm sure. And he's been with Salesforce for almost 20 years now. And I will say is without question, not only one of the top thought leaders at Salesforce, but a top thought leader in the technical industry. And Peter is based somewhere south of Bellevue, Washington, at least according to some of the conversations we were having earlier today. So I'm going to get ready here to verbally pass this over to Peter Mulford, as he's going to be interviewing Peter Coffey during today's session. But before I pass this to Peter Mulford, just a couple of logistical items. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality within Zoom. I'm going to be taking a look and keeping an eye on it, and certainly surfacing those questions when appropriate. And last thing I'll say is this is a webinar really meant to be sort of an introduction to the Hike2 Innovation Summit, a journey into what innovation could look like for your companies, for your firms, and you'll hear a bit more about that towards the end of today's session. With that, I will verbally pass this over to Peter Mulford to get this started.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mike, and hello, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Lovely to chat with you again. The one thing I didn't say to you the first time we met is I've actually followed your posts and writing for some time. I've actually been a happy consumer of everything you write at LinkedIn and Genomica and other places. And
happy to hear it.
I would share Mike's praise. I think you've done, by my lights, an amazing job at taking some complex ideas and making them not just easy to understand, but also kind of fun and engaging. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. And we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to get into conversations about AI and emerging technology in the future and other areas of interest. But before we do, I think a lot of people on this call probably know you, but many don't. And I know in addition to being the VP for Strategic Research, you're also the president of the Foundation for Intelligent Life on Earth, right? So somehow you found time on your calendar to work on climate change and the exploration of Earth and space and the rest of it. So maybe to begin, how would you summarize what you actually do for a living? And how is it that you came to be in this position in the first place?
Okay, two separate, two related but different questions. I wound up doing what I do for a living, oddly enough, because my initial degree was in civil engineering, which is not what most people assume. They assume that I'm a computer science student, degree holder. But my motivation as an undergrad was to address the energy problem, which at the time that I was beginning my college work was a relatively new thing, the gas lines and, OPEC becoming a political force. And I very much wanted to do something about that. But while I was in my undergraduate years, nuclear power went through a terribly challenging time of credibility and cost issues and so on. And I decided that whatever the kind of energy plant was being built, at some point, someone was going to have to build something. And really the challenges were going to be at least as much civil engineering challenges as anything else. And in fact, my department head said that it was his greatest professional disappointment that lawyers had become the profession associated with environmental stewardship and protection. And he said it should have been us. It should have been the civil engineers who took the professional and ethical responsibility for building things that were sustainable and friendly to the planet and did not widen gaps of economic inequality. And I took that with me into my professional years. And at every point, I feel like it's been my job not to refine and improve existing solutions for already understood problems, but to do what sometimes has been called the 5 whys. Well, why do you think that's a problem? Well, why do you think that's a problem? And get back to root causes, because at that point, it turns out that actual opportunity for innovation does arise, and you can solve a redefined problem with a previously unavailable or uncost-effective technology. And I've been fortunate enough to do that on the environmental compliance side in the oil and gas industry, on the space asset management side in the aerospace industry, 18 years in the trade press where I had kind of an open hunting license to go out and find out what are people trying to do that they should no longer be trying to do better, because that's not the right thing to be doing at all. That's a Peter Drucker statement. There is no greater sin than doing what has become the wrong thing with greater efficiency. And then to get into your other question about, well, what about at Salesforce? My job, in a sense, began in 2004 with a conversation with our co-founder, CEO, Mark Benioff, where he asked me in my capacity as a trade journalist, talking largely with the application developer and CTO community, was there any appetite for the idea of, if you didn't need a CRM, buying everything from Salesforce that they used to make a CRM, but then building whatever you wanted on that platform? The idea of a platform as a service and not just a business application, a point solution as a service. And we did spend 3 years working down a checklist of, well, what do you need to be a credible general purpose IT platform? And then how do you deliver that in a way that reduces irrelevant complexity instead of creating new complexity in what eventually came to be called the cloud? It wasn't even being called the cloud at that point. And then that became a paycheck in 2007. And as has been mentioned, I've been with Salesforce ever since, because every couple of years, the scope of what people expect from their vendors, their governments, their healthcare providers, their educational institutions, their expectations continually rise. And technology can help with addressing those, but a readiness to understand the expectation is actually sometimes the greater challenge. And that's what I do for internal audiences at Salesforce, and also for our partners and customers and other stakeholders.
That's really interesting. So if I heard you right there, It sounds like an interesting intersection for you and me. So it was 2007 then that you made the leap from, it sounds like, being a professional journalist to
Yes,
Salesforce. Did I get
that's
that right?
correct. That's correct. January 2007. Yep.
That is really funny. 2007 happens to be the year I took my first class in machine learning. So I don't know if that was if that's a strange coincidence there, but
Things align. Things
yeah, there
align.
you go. Funny how
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah.
Well, let's thank you for that background. As I said, we do have a vast landscape to
Oh,
cover.
yeah.
And I think probably the first mountain in our path for us to climb is artificial intelligence.
Sure.
Right? You know, I don't know about you, but it feels like this may be the first time in my career I can think of where a technology has at once captured people's attention so fully and then vigorously divided those people
Yes.
into two different camps, right? So my first question for you is if there's a lot of different ways to parse the continuum,
Right.
but it strikes me on one side of this continuum from worry to enthusiasm, you
Yes.
have people with real expertise, right, who seem genuinely concerned, like the Jeff Hintons and the
Yes.
Yashua Geos over here, and they're quite worried about the negative impact that AI could have on the world. And then you have equally qualified and learned people on the other side, like Mark Andreessen or Jan LeCun down the road from you at Meta, who are quite sanguine about it. In fact, so much so, it often seems like they're dismissive of the people who are worried. So
Yes.
to kick things off, where do you locate yourself on that continuum from worried to sanguine, say, and how is it you locate yourself there?
Well, I am not of the Terminators are coming to take over the planet school of thought, because if you actually look what happens when you ask an AI to do anything outside of the domain in which it's been trained, you discover very quickly that whatever human intelligence is, we haven't really learned how to write code that does that. We just have not. The early example that was used as long ago, I think, as the 1970s, is that when the Emison medical diagnostic system was given a description of a rusty car, it diagnosed measles.
Okay.
The point being that these things are capable of astonishingly useful results in the domain for which they were built, and they generally fail to demonstrate the kind of resilience and adaptability that you would expect of a 10-year-old child in many respects. So I'm not of the doomsayer prospect. I am, however, capable of being pleasantly surprised by what they can do. For example, just a few weeks ago, I took 65,000 words of internal essays, blog posts, if you will, that I'd been writing here at Salesforce, specifically focused on competitive success. They were written for our account teams on how to be more effective in presenting what we do to our customers. They were written for that direction. And I asked it the question, how can an independent practitioner achieve greatest success with Salesforce? So I flipped the script completely and said, how can customers use this effectively? These were not written for that, but it derived a 12-point a few words plus a few paragraphs. It generated an extraordinarily useful outline of 12 things you could do as an IT change agent, including deep listening and an innovation mindset and a platform orientation. And I don't know that I could have generated anything that good if I'd had a week to work on it. So I'm capable of being pleasantly surprised by what they can do, as long as you have an appropriate respect for the limits on what they are able to do, and a healthy regard for what they should be allowed to do.
Got it. So
not allowed to do.
So if I'm hearing you right there, Peter, it seems like the crucial variable for you is the capabilities of the system currently as they exist. And
yes.
Got it.
Well, the message I'm trying to send to people is that adding AI to incomplete, inaccurate, irrelevant data doesn't turn it into intelligence. You can't sprinkle gold dust on a garbage pile and turn it into a gold mine. And at the same time, adding AI to a bad process does not make it a better process. And so among the reasons why, if you look at some statistics, there's actually been a little bit of a pullback in enterprise appetite for increased AI spending over the coming 12 months. The percentage who anticipate that now compared to the percentage who anticipated that a year ago has actually come down a little bit. And I believe that's because their initial interactions surfaced a recognition that, well, wow, we've got a lot of data orchestration and process streamlining, or even process illumination and clarity to achieve before an AI spend even makes sense to do. And I welcome that, because we have said for our entire history as a company that the point is to enable a better process, not to expect a tool to give you a process. If a tool can guide a process, it can do that. But interestingly, in some of our largest customers, the first question that a business unit leader has asked is, oh, okay, we're adopting Salesforce. Can I tailor it to our current process? And sometimes you need someone with the Thor's hammer of the CEO to say, we don't know why you think you've got a better idea of optimal process than thousands of Salesforce customers have collectively, created over the last 2 decades. But you're going to use it the way it's provided for a while before you start monkeying around with it to make it do what you're accustomed to doing.
Got it. So, there was a lot in there. I would say, I think one place where you and I are in complete agreement is, I like you, I find myself often in conversations with executives, and when the topic of, AGI or artificial superintelligence, or, whatever term you want to use comes up, my general suggestion is that it's kind of a shiny object. It's not that there isn't an engineering pathway to get there. It just, if you have a limited amount of time to focus on what matters, it may not be the thing. Now, the interesting pushback I get, though, and I want to funnel the pushback to you.
Yes.
Is it came actually in the form of a question I received just this week in Chicago from an executive, and her point was, well, okay, Pete, fine, if that's true, how do you, Peter, and now I'm saying to you, Peter,
yes,
how do you explain that there is such a wide range of opinion about AI risk among equally well-informed and equally well-educated people? So if, for you, when you're out and you're with your technology friends and your venture capital friends,
yes,
and you kind of dig deep and try to understand why those differences exist, what do you typically find at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I don't want to oversimplify, but there are companies that have AI in the name of the company. And for those companies, AI is a product. There are companies that do not have AI in their name. And for them, AI is an enabler for whatever business it is that they're actually in. Now, that business may be an evolving business model. There are many companies that thought they were in a product business a decade ago who now realize that the recurring revenue stream from wrapping services around their product is a much more intimate and enduring connection with a customer than talking to them every 3 years about, so you need a new pump. If you can sell the pump, but at the same time be selling real-time diagnostics for preventive maintenance, real-time analysis of the operations, that you can actually become a partner in energy cost reduction or other related value adds. This is how you create a premium service instead of merely a competitive product. And for an example, all you would have to do is go look at the iPod, which when it was first introduced was treated by the marketplace as a somewhat overpriced, somewhat underfeatured MP3 player. But that was because people didn't realize that Steve Jobs wasn't trying to sell a better digital music player. He was trying to put your favorite songs in your pocket. And the combination of iPod plus iTunes was a novel recognition of what I believe I kind of said before. Go back and find the underlying need that you're meeting instead of the product you're selling. And my demonstration of how right he got it is that 3 years after the iPod was introduced, the Oxford English Dictionary added the word podcast. And oddly, we still call it podcasting, even though I'm not sure Apple even sells a thing called an iPod anymore, because that function has been completely subsumed into your phone and your watch.
That's really interesting. So I think what I would take away from that, and staying within the context of artificial intelligence,
Sure.
you didn't say this explicitly, but I think implicit in that is, it sounds like the advice one could take away from that story is, look, when you're thinking about AI, it should be one of those things where start with a deep understanding of a kind of problem you want to solve,
Yes.
and then ladder backwards to an AI-based solution.
Yeah, if you don't have any understanding of the actual need you're meeting, if you have never been on a ride along where you watch your customer attempting to do the thing they do with your product, someone said thinking outside the box is not a matter of thinking of the box as a boundary on what you do. The box is an interface. And if you don't know what are people doing right before, during, and right after they use the thing you sold them, if you don't have that context, if you don't understand that context, then you don't understand your customer and you don't realize how much value you could be adding by smoothly integrating those services. Very simple example. I think we were talking the other day about United Airlines. They've got an app. It's a good app. It tells you the gate of your departing flight and so on. At one point, they added, and I happen to know it only took 6 lines of JavaScript code to do this, they added a call your Uber button to the United app. Why was that brilliant? Well, when you land at an unfamiliar airport, what's one of your first questions? Darn it, where's the Uber pickup point here? United knows what gate you arrived at, knows what the nearest pickup point is for that airport, can book your Uber and tell them correctly which pickup point you will be at. And what they do by doing this is keep you under the umbrella of the United owning your experience door to door and not just airport gate to airport gate. And it's a very simple idea that they're going to own responsibility for you getting from building in one city to building in another city, and not just bound their responsibility with the part that takes place in an airport or on a plane.
So what I heard there that's kind of interesting is what was rattling around in my head, Peter, as a United flyer myself, is
Yes.
That sounds like a great app and wouldn't it be great if I could have AI do all that for me?
Yes. And that is the next logical step, to go from AI that will answer your question to AI that will, when directed with appropriate guardrails, execute the action.
Well, that's probably a good segue to my next question for you then. This is I'm sure people who have tuned in here are interested in hearing not just about where AI is, but where
Yes.
it's going. And
Yes.
harkening back to Mark's presentation a couple of days ago,
Yes.
the key thing, I don't know if you've seen the transcript, but the key thing he talked about was Agent Force. And
Yes.
I think he even went so far as to say that Agent Force is the next step in Salesforce evolution. And of course, we don't want to turn this webinar into a sales pitch for sales.
I won't let you do that. So yeah.
Okay, good. But I think however, having said that,
Yeah.
I think you and I would probably agree that one of, looking at AI from the future back, one of the things that most leaders most of the time ought to be aware of is agentic AI as a
Yes.
class of systems. So
Yes.
let's get into that. And before I do that, could you explain to our listeners what we mean by agentic AI, just as a class of AI systems?
Sure. Well, if you go back to the 1955 Dartmouth memo, when they talked about artificial intelligence, it's generally regarded as the birth of that phrase. They thought the hard parts were what people find hard to do, which are things like inductive and deductive reasoning and pattern recognition. And that's why they had the breathtakingly naive idea, as they said in the early 1960s, that within a generation, we would basically have the problem of AI solved. And by the mid-1980s, the same people who had been saying that earlier were saying, oh, wait, this is one of the hardest problems we've ever faced. Because it turns out that knowing, which we do in a very natural way as humans, is tremendously difficult to represent in code. And the example I use is that if you're walking down the street, you pass a delicatessen, you suddenly realize, oh, I finished my last gallon of milk this morning, I need some milk. You probably have not been thinking all day, got to remember the milk, got to remember the milk. And yet somehow in the moment when that awareness was useful, it surfaced without having burdened you all day. Writing code that can spontaneously retrieve the right information for the moment you're in and the problem you need to solve right now without being bogged down in irrelevancy is a research problem that we've been working on for a long time. So the main thing we think that we're able to do with Agentforce is have AI that knows what's going on. It knows the state of play of your relationship with a customer. It is able, with a unified metadata framework, to take what our work with Deloitte has shown to be typically 36 different splinters or shards of process and identity that you may have with any given customer, and really pull those things together into something that's a far more holistic readiness to know what's likely to be useful and to recommend and, with permission, execute action to get that done. So going from mere ratiocination AI to AI that can make predictions, to AI that has the necessary context and agency to be able to take action is a very logical step. But what's made it possible is literally a 3,000-fold growth of the connective capacity of the planet, so that the right data can be cost effectively available, combined with a 100-billion-fold improvement in the energy efficiency of computing since the 1950s, so that now your Apple Watch is executing Siri without even calling out to that server in your pocket called an iPhone. The idea of pushing this compute capacity to the edge of the network and having that capacity be informed by accurate contextual data subject to appropriate protections of privacy and trust. This is a golden intersection that we've been pursuing for decades, and that we believe we're going to make meaningful progress in delivering, as people will see at our Dreamforce conference next week.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that Agentforce is going to be front and center at Dreamforce.
Very much so.
So there was a lot in there, but what I would have our listeners take away from that is, at bottom, an AI agent it moves beyond what an LM can do, which is
Yeah.
content,
Yeah.
and it's actually a system that can perform tasks on its own. Right?
Well,
So
it's more than that. It can perform the task. Our CEO for AI, Clara, she said, it's one thing to have an AI that will write an email and ask, did you like the email? It's another thing to have an AI that can monitor the state of conversation with a customer, note that certain key phrases are being used, suggesting either concern or frustration or even anger, recommend an email to be written to that customer, and then measure the resulting change in that customer's behavior. I mean, that's a much larger and much more useful scope.
Sure.
For AI as a coworker. You don't really need an intern who can draft an email and say, did you like the email? You need a wingman or a wing person who recognizes a problem maybe before you do, autonomously and on its own initiative recommends a mitigatory or preventive action to deal with that problem, and then gets back to you and says, okay, this is what we did, this is what happened, this is what I think we should do next. But we don't use the phrase human in the loop. We use the phrase human at the helm to describe where the human needs to be in that process. It's not that the human's there to be a circuit breaker if the AI does something wrong. It's that the human is always in a role to be guiding and defining success, wrapped around what the machine intelligence can do to support that.
So what I think I heard there, I mean, I think the crucial distinction maybe that we'd want our listeners to take away from, agentic AI versus the AI that they know today is
Sure.
that AI agents can actually interact with their environment.
Yes.
Oftentimes in physical ways, whether it's
Yes.
steering your car, right, or tapping on a screen, or understanding a client interaction or a certain situation.
Yeah. Well, it's very important. It's very important to go beyond the idea that this is just for people who interact with screens. For example, you probably know the name Bosch. You might have a Bosch dishwasher in your home. You might have a Bosch electronics box under the hood of your car running the ignition system. That's that's the kind of thing they do. I was with them in Berlin a few years ago to look at a new generation of assembly line power tools, hand tools. It's something called a nut runner, for example, whose only job is to be a power wrench, okay? But this one had a barcode scanner built into the handle and a browser screen on the top. And when you walked up to a workpiece and scanned its code, it said, oh, okay, we need this bolt torqued to this level. You did that, and it would log which operator at which workstation torqued that bolt correctly at which date and time, and it would detect things like, oh, this operator is only doing 3 bolts an hour instead of the normal 10 or 20. Is there a problem with their tool? Is there a problem with their training? And having the hand tool, this is a phrase that Martin Heidegger used in The Origin of the Work of Art, the tool disappears into its function. The operator is not aware of interacting with AI. They're just tightening bolts. And the AI is there as an embedded and non-intrusive support and assistant to help get that done better and to help get the necessary records kept with a higher level of accuracy and trust. And that's my idea of where this goes, is that it stops being a place you go. Imagine if you were in your office and to use a telephone, you had to go down the hall to the telephone room. No, we put telephones on everyone's desk at one point, and now, of course, everyone just carries their phone with them. The intelligence needs to come to you. It cannot be a guru at the top of the mountain that you have to, struggle to go consult and learn an arcane language to ask your questions. It simply needs to come to you and be in the flow of your work, offering what's helpful, learning from what you do and do not choose to accept from it, and always respecting that you're the one in charge.
So, Peter, a lot in there again. I guess if maybe to put a bow on artificial intelligence, whether it's agentic AI or otherwise, I think
Yes.
if we empathize with non-technical CEOs for a moment, who
Yes.
what it's like being a CEO. It's every morning you wake up to 3 things the CEO ought to know about whatever, and everything's always an emergency. And I think
Yep.
AI is just the latest in a long list of things that CEOs are expected to worry about.
Yep.
If you would have most CEOs most of the time give some of their cognitive browser window to think about AI, of all the things they could be thinking about, what is the thing you would suggest they ought to get out ahead of as it relates to this technology?
I sometimes say that among the greatest challenges is that well-adjusted people become numb to their pain and don't wake up every morning getting mad all over again at things that they believe they've learned are not going to be fixable problems. And Mark Benioff has said that when working with people, for example, in the San Francisco public schools, the phrase he had to use most often was think bigger. The phrase I use is, you got to rip off the scabs and make them feel the pain all over again before they'll be ready to hear that. And you don't have to put up with that pain anymore. It's not the friction, rust, and gravity of your world anymore. That can be fixed now. And you don't need to talk about the new rubber compound that makes the tires last longer when you're building a flying car. Yeah. And you need to be prepared to step back and say, stop focusing on things that look like solving a problem, but are really just remediating the symptoms of a problem that no longer has any right to exist. And if at any point you're reminding yourself, this is the need our customers have when they come to us, or it's the need they have that they don't realize we could help solve. The person who came up with the idea of selling bags of cat litter to put in the trunk of your car to weight down the tires and to go under the tires to help you, drive in the snow and ice, that didn't come from focus groups of cat owners. That came from someone who was prepared to zoom out and really, well, what's this thing that we sell? What else could you do with that? And 3M is a company with a particular genius for looking at what could you do with the ability to put an adhesive film on a piece of paper that peels off without damaging it. You know what? Where do these things come from? And they come from being prepared to step back from addressing the symptoms of the problem you should no longer allow to exist. And as Peter Drucker said in his 7 Sources of Innovation Opportunity, a moment of incongruity when you say, it's crazy that we still put up with this and with buying things to fix this, we should just kill this problem. This problem should just be cut off at the source.
I want to, we do have to move to questions for the broader audience, but I do want to push back on one thing you said there and see,
Okay.
get your reaction to it.
Okay.
I think it seems like your point is one that we hear often, and that is leaders have to expand their imagination or think divergently beyond what can often be a kind of unreflective day-to-day focus around getting stuff done and almost being kind of compliant. But most CEOs I know would also probably agree, look, we know we need to do that. It's just a question of how do you strike the balance between the two? In other words, how do I, as a busy chief executive, keep my feet in two places at once, which is scaling today's business model and deal with firefighting on the one hand while creating the appropriate time or space to think more broadly. Have you in your years seen any kind of reliably scalable approach to figuring out how to strike that balance beyond simply throwing it out and saying one should do it?
Well, very quickly, we're going to get into a phrase that I think we knew we were going to be addressing today, which is, what does an innovation culture look like?
Right.
It does not look like a company that has an office of innovation that delivers ideas to the coalface that make people say, wow, they clearly don't actually understand what we do here. I mean, that's how you wind up with money pits and bright shiny objects. I think you may have used the bright shiny phrase earlier.
Yeah.
Our COO at the time was once asked, after the first time that Forbes magazine named us world's most innovative company, he was asked, well, how do you do that? What does your Office of Innovation look like at Salesforce? He said, well, the Office of Innovation here is called Salesforce. I saw a demo once where our human resources people at Salesforce, we call it employee success, which is another whole conversation, that labeling issue does matter. Rather than asking IT, when stock compensation was broadened to a much larger fraction of the company, rather than asking IT to build an app to help with the onboarding process or writing a document to help with that onboarding process, they drank our own champagne and used our low-code and no-code tools to build that app themselves. And in the process, as user zero, we're able to give feedback to the people producing those tools to say, hey, we are professional developers, we're HR people, and we wanted this thing to exist. And that the readiness to engage at that level is a cultural accomplishment. And if the CEO is doing it right, you get what the US Navy used to call the doctrine of completed staff work, where instead of bringing you problems, your people bring you reports of what they've noticed, what they've proposed to do about it, what they've done about it so far, and all you have to say is, yeah, keep going with that, or incremental, redirection of that effort. Instead of asking the CEO to be the noticer in chief, you ask the CEO to be the guidance system rather than the propulsion system, if you will, for that attitude of energetic exploration of improvement.
Got it. So I realized I took up a little bit more of the oxygen than I was meant to. We were meant to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, but I will redress that by with 5 minutes left. Turning back over to Mike. Any questions from the audience?
Peter, I haven't seen any quite yet, and Dan Prokop, you can keep me honest on this too. So I feel like if you're okay with it, I know you have lots of other questions for Peter Coffey.
I certainly do.
I feel like we can kind of keep this going if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I know that.
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn and other places. If people have a question that they know is not going to be answerable in 30 seconds, I would not feel imposed upon if people said, hey, saw you and Peter Mulford the other day. What do you think about this? So this is the beginning of that conversation and not the end.
Well, you know what I'm going to do? Peter, I'm going to give you an easy one. I know that one of the other things that this audience was interested in discussing was the quite simple topic of quantum computing. And again, keeping in mind, staying empathetic with
Sure.
business-minded, non-technical CEOs.
Happy to do that.
What would you say? What, if anything, should business people be paying attention to as it relates to this topic of quantum computers?
Well, let's put this in very concrete terms. People sometimes say, because of what they've been told, that computers can only think in ones and zeros. That's not a limitation of computing. And in the very early days, people that wasn't a decision that had already been made. but Norbert Wiener at MIT, in his book Cybernetics, Communication and Control and the Man and the Machine in the 1940s, did the math and figured out that for any given generation of hardware, the cheapest way to represent information electronically is not with, like 10 different levels of voltage representing digits 0 through 9, but with 2 levels of voltage, on or off, and then make everything else, binary. And we've been working with the result, the bit, the binary digit, zeros and ones, on or off in various combinations ever since. And even the most elaborate AI that people are using today at some level is down there at that level of it's either an on or an off at any given point in the system. Quantum computing, instead of bits, represents information with something called qubits, Q-U-B-I-T instead of B-I-T, quantum bits, that because of the nature of quantum properties at the level of very low levels of physics, can in a sense be said to represent multiple values simultaneously, and therefore to explore problems in a far more powerful kind of way. And for example, there is a supermarket chain in Germany using algorithms developed for quantum hardware, even though the quantum hardware is not there yet, that has taken a complex but very ordinary problem of restocking supermarket shelves and cut the time to do that from many hours to a few tens of minutes, to the point that now, instead of coming up with one solution, they can generate several solutions and pick the one they like. And there is a change. They can go from solving a problem to optimizing their solution for that problem. If you merely threw the new hardware and said, oh, great, now we'll get it done in 2 minutes instead of 2 hours. Well, you could do that. But if you have the cultural orientation, like, well, wait a minute, if we can do it in 2 minutes, doesn't that mean that we can now evaluate several options? That's a new behavior. The technology won't tell you to do that. You have to see the opportunity to do that. Now, that's the positive side. Many more problems can become optimization opportunities instead of just having to settle for the first solution you can find. So that's one thing that happens with this.
Okay, so let me hold on, Peter. There was a
Sure.
lot in there. Let me just make sure everybody is tracking along. So basically, what you're saying is, you have these computers that have some really weird properties to them, and you were scratching over the surface of superposition and entanglement and decoherence and the rest of it.
Yeah.
For those who aren't,
there are whole sets of quantum stuff that I'm not even talking about here. Yeah.
There's stuff going on here, and the punchline is that these systems, when they work, can do mathematical calculations that are just well beyond the reach of even the most powerful computer So there's the first thing I heard you say.
In terms of this, the sheer compute power and speed of arriving at a solution, they change the game. Yes.
Got it. And so you gave one example, which was interesting, where they don't even have the hardware, but it was
thinking about the algorithmic approach that the hardware would enable has led to some interesting new insights. Yes.
Got it. So my question for you is this: with the minute that is left, I listened to Seth Lloyd, over at MIT talking about this recently, and he surprised me, at least at the end of his lecture, by saying he gives it 50-50 that these things actually end up working the way we're hoping that they're going to work. Now, this is just one researcher's point of view, but again, if I'm a CEO and I'm thinking about, you had me, Peter and Peter, with AI, and you had me with thinking divergently. I'll add that to my list of things to do. And now there's this idea that maybe coming down the pipe that quantum computing is going to become a thing.
Yeah.
How, if at all, should I approach staying on top of this? Or is this even a thing that as a CEO I need not worry about now? And I can kind of ask my CTO.
The latter. If you allow your problem statement as a CEO to become, I have to be ready for quantum computing, that's only relevant if your company makes computers. At any given point, the thing you should be asking yourself is, what's my current pain point of things we're trying to do that are costing too much, or things our customers wish we would do that we're not doing well enough, and let the technology providers come along. If you have well-defined processes, Peter, the technology will infuse those processes.
So let me just challenge you on one point there.
Sure.
Just I see your point, and I raise you public key cryptography. I was at
Yes,
a
that
session
was
not
where I
that.
was going to go when I talked about the dark side of quantum. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And so the
Yeah.
just for the audience, where I was going to take Peter, the other Peter is the other thing about quantum computing is, depending on who you talk to, there's a belief that if you can get the systems to work, then by dint of something called Shor's algorithm,
Yes.
it could break public key cryptography schemes, which is a fancy way of saying quantum computers could go after your company data and your account at Citibank or anywhere else.
Yes.
So does that change your calculus at all, Peter, in terms of things to think about, or still?
It does not, but it does not, but it creates a necessity to, in a very concrete way, live in the future. The expectation of what's been called a cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer becoming available by, say, the year 2035 is sufficiently definite that the US federal government has directed agencies to assume that their encrypted data will be vulnerable, will be subject to attack by quantum methods no later than the year 2035. And the comment I've made is that when your ability to introduce new computing infrastructure is slower than the change of the environment of the technology, you have to make pre-investments that might seem premature. If you are not evaluating the National Institute of Standards and Technology's list of 5 candidate algorithms for encryption that are in fact quantum attack ready, those exist. Those are not speculative. There's real stuff available that people who are genuinely worried about this, I mean, some data is valueless after 10 seconds. If you're doing high velocity trading on Wall Street, you don't really need to worry about whether your data can be broken in an hour instead of a year. But if you're keeping data that needs to be kept confidential or private for years or decades, you should have someone in your organization making sure that your systems are well defined in a modular way so that plugging in new quantum ready encryption won't require you to take everything apart and start all over again. It's a matter of anticipating the things that will need to be replaced. Call it Lego blocks, if you will. I use the Rubik's Cube model. If I hand you a fully solved Rubik's Cube, it's a very simple object, but the day you need to change it, you don't have to break it. You don't have to disassemble it. You can just twist it into the new form. Being able to have that kind of a platform mentality and recognizing that at some point you'll need to plug in a new quantum resistant encryption facility and anticipating that need is something that people can do today.
Yeah, that's great. Again, there was a lot of goodness, a lot of richness in that description. I would say, to keep it even simpler for anyone who is thinking, okay, wow, I really ought to pay attention to this, you can simply start paying attention to something called post-quantum cryptography.
Yes.
Post-quantum cryptography, you can even Bing it or Google it, and what you'll notice is this is a whole category of research and technology and discussion around what do we do, or what can we do when and if these machines actually reach their full potential, and in the way that the other Peter just described. So
another crucial consideration, I realize we're tight on time, is if you're worried about protecting data, the fewer copies of that data there are, the less your attack surface is going to be. And so this is one of the proactive measures we've taken at Salesforce to launch and achieve broad participation in what we're calling the zero copy partner network that is looking at ways to do AI that minimize the number of redundant or possibly inconsistent and definitely costly and potentially vulnerable copies of data that wind up accumulating in various nooks and crannies of the systems. It is possible to be proactive about limiting the emergence of the problem instead of just assuming that we'll throw technology at the problem after it exists.
It's so funny about when you say that, Peter. What you made me think of is, I know AWS is a Salesforce partner, and I think it was Andy Jassy, and you can do a fact check later. My apologies if it wasn't Andy, but I know someone at Salesforce famously said, or at least famous to me, he said something along the lines of, people say that data is the new oil, and it's really popular to say that, but actually looked at differently, it's not the new oil. It's certain type of data is really valuable, but having too much of it is actually a dangerous thing because it exposes you to all kinds of liability. And
Well, in a world of
all kind of
GDPR, in a world of
risk.
California Consumer Privacy Act, the more data you are holding, the more risk you are taking of becoming a compliance issue or of winding up responsible for a breach, or more opportunities for inconsistency and incompleteness you have. I would have to also recommend Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, for an understanding from both sides of the looking glass, if you will, of what kind of data is being collected out there and what kind of responsibilities and governance burdens are arising for those who do that.
Well, Mike, it's funny. I'd like to linger on this point for a moment and specifically talk about regulation and, where regulatory environment and where it's going. But before I do that, do we have time, Mike, for me to needle Peter about AI regulation, or is this the point where I have to turn it back over to you?
I'd love to make that the last point that we do. I do have to myself be somewhere else at the top of the hour, but I'd love to go there for a moment.
Then let's do this. I mean, I think most of our listeners probably know that there's, the EU and other governments have been hammering out AI regulation for years now. And right down the road for you in California, you've got SB 1047, right? And for those who don't know that, I think it's still sitting on Newsom's desk. But the point of the regulation is simply to require powerful AI models to undergo safety testing before they can be released. That's the shorthand.
That's the general idea.
My question for you is, this is all still relatively new. And so there's kind of a vector where we can see where AI regulation is going without being sure of where it's going to land. So same question as always, Peter. And by the way, it's amazing to me, again, how divisive this has proven to be in the AI community. I mean, you have some folks at OpenAI and famously Elon Musk saying, hey, I'm in favor. And then you have bright lights like Andrew Ng saying he would protest in the streets of San Francisco over this legislation. So my question for you is, without getting you to opine on the bill itself, how, as a futurist, do you see the general trajectory of all of this regulatory effort? And how, as a future-minded leader, do I need to start thinking today about where all of this might be going?
Well, the EU AI Act is not a hypothetical. It exists. It's been written. And I have multiple problems with it. First of all, it's called an act. It isn't really a piece of legislation. It's a regulation directing member states to write actual laws. And if you just do a text search of the EU AI Act and look for phrases like member states should and member states shall, you realize that all it really does is lay out the rules for what will be, in all likelihood, a half dozen or maybe even over a dozen different legislative interpretations that are going to not radically simplify the task of being compliant with those rules. And this is something that emerged, of course, with GDPR, where it's algebraically impossible to be in strict conformance with every single clause of GDPR, because it requires you to do one thing on the one hand that preserves the owner's control of their data, another thing on another hand that preserves law enforcement's ability to do things, and they're not actually compatible. The only message I can give people is, if you're treating your customers' data in a way that you would not be embarrassed to have to explain on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow morning, you're probably going to be okay. And if you're having to fall back on, oh, well, we were in compliance with this detailed clause of the law, I'm sorry, you've already lost in the court of customer opinion, irrespective of what the courts might eventually say. The existence of the rules is a guide to the concerns that people have. Satisfy those concerns and worry about the details of the compliance later. The concerns are what matter.
So if I'm, this is probably a nice note to end on. If I'm hearing you right, you're basically saying, look, at the end of the day, integrity is what you do even when nobody's looking.
Well, absolutely. And there's a reason why I don't think we ever have any interaction like this without someone at some point saying, well, trust is our number one value at Salesforce. We never get tired of saying that. We often say it as the first thing. I'm happy to have the chance to say it as the last.
Peter, thank you for, that was fast.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. We got to
was
do
a
this
lot of
again
fun.
sometime.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks to our friends at Hike 2 for making the effort to get us all together. And look forward to seeing
a
you at
fast
the
60
Innovation
minutes.
Summit next year.
Yes, that's great. Great tee up, Peter, Peter Mulford. And Peter Coffey, I know you have another meeting, so please do feel free
I
to drop off.
got 2.5 minutes, and all I have to do is do 3 clicks. So
All right, well, I'm
Me too.
going to ask a question that came in from the audience actually
please.
around just how to stay up to date on all these topics that, we seem like we hit 3 or 4 or 5 or so, but how to stay up to date on some of these, just given so much change and everything else. Is it, I know you all post in LinkedIn, but I'm sure there's different blogs that you review and books and such. What is, if how can someone like myself stay up to date?
My method is not to allow myself to be overwhelmed by the details, but to have 4 buckets in my head. There's connection, the fact of connection, the possibility of collaboration, the power of computation, and the relevance of what I haven't found a better phrase than ex machination. And if every time something comes in, I can say, okay, is this a connection issue? Is this a collaboration opportunity? Is this about the ability to operate on the data? Or is this about the ability to create things that will operate on that data for me? It sort of acts as a categorization for me that keeps me from being overwhelmed by minutia and allows me to try to in some way make sense of it all.
Peter Mulford, anything you'd add?
For me, it's just a matter of blocking off time every day and exploring. I mean, it's interesting. We live in a world where, for the most part, we do have access to the sum of all human and to some extent non-human knowledge. It's being able to tap into it is just a matter of making the effort. And then I'd say once you do that, the only other top spin I would add is something Peter referred to earlier, which is rather than just explore a particular thing in a silo, cast a wide net.
Yes.
Use lots of different topics. And if you ever read my tea leaves, I'm always saying, connect the dots. And
yes.
Something interesting happens there when you make surprising connections between something you've read from, the culinary world and something from artificial intelligence and something from neuropsychology.
Yep.
That would be my recommendation. So read a lot and then connect the dots and look for surprising future states.
And we're at 15 seconds to the hour, and I'm going to have to go, but it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Peter
Coffey, thank you very much. And Peter Mulford mentioned the Hike 2 Innovation Summit. I'll say 30 seconds on that. In March, March 26 and 27 to be specific, we'll have our Innovation Summit, a place where Peter Mulford's actually presented at before, and we'll hear from top leaders really talking about where they think businesses are headed in the future. We'll have breakout sessions, panel discussions, workshops, really led by many different industry experts. It's a way to network, to have engaging conversations with peers, with industry leaders, and really sort of other like-minded professionals. We certainly hopefully hope that you can join us at the end of March for our Innovation Summit. And this webinar is really meant to sort of tee up and be a teaser, if you will, for that summit. I know Peter Coffey's gone. I'll thank him later. I think I already thanked him. I'm going to thank Peter Mulford now as well, though, for just delivering a thoughtful and an impactful session today. And to everyone else out there, a million thanks to all of you for joining, for participating. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.